All right, welcome to the deep dive,
Yeah.
where we take one super interesting topic, unpack the key sources for you, and give you that knowledge that, you really want to know. And
Yeah.
today, we are going deep on Monroe Beardsley,
Monroe Beardsley.
aesthetic philosophy. Now, you sent over
Yes.
the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry.
I did.
And
It's a good one.
it's a long one, too.
It is.
But
It's worth it.
definitely some rich stuff in there.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, what strikes me, right away about Beardsley is just the breadth of his work,
Yeah.
We're going to be focusing on aesthetics, but,
Yeah.
the guy was into logic, philosophy of history. He even wrote really influential works on just straight up critical thinking.
Like practical logic and
Practical logic.
thinking straight.
Yeah.
Thinking straight, like just getting people to think better. And it's just really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that really comes through in his aesthetic philosophy, too.
Absolutely.
It's like you said, this incredibly rigorous and analytic approach to art
Right.
and beauty, which you wouldn't normally think of as the realm of logic and reasoning.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, his 1958 book, Aesthetics, Problems in the Philosophy of Criticism.
Yes.
I mean, that is considered foundational, the first real systematic treatment of art in the analytic tradition. I mean, that's just
a turning point, really, in the way philosophers have thought about art.
Yeah, absolutely. And its impact has been huge.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the book covers this massive range of topics, and some people even consider it the most important book.
Yeah, in 20th century aesthetics.
In 20th century analytic aesthetics.
It's a big claim.
Big claim, but, I mean...
Don't it?
I mean, I get it.
It's hard to argue with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely had an enduring influence.
Absolutely. And he followed that up, right? He had the possibility of criticism.
That's right, in 1970.
Yeah, focusing on literary interpretation specifically. And then in 82,
yep.
he had the aesthetic point of view, which is a collection of essays.
Right, kind of brings together his whole...
I feel like his vision.
His whole approach to art.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think our goal today is to really get to the heart of these core ideas, right? Unpack them in a way that you'd expect if you were talking to another philosopher who was an expert.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Give them that deep dive.
Deep dive.
I think a good place to start is just like what the intellectual influences.
Yeah.
Like
the environment he was working in?
Yeah, like the stuff that shaped his philosophy. Yeah, totally. So what were some of the big ones for him?
Well, I mean, you got to start with the art itself, right?
Yeah, so like his personal engagement with art.
Yeah, his love for art, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of his starting point.
Yeah.
Before any of the philosophy.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't coming to it with some big theory that he was trying to impose on art. It was really coming from that lived experience of art.
Right, and that's so crucial because I feel like that comes through in his work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like this genuine passion.
For sure, yeah.
And what about...
Well, the second big influence was art criticism.
Okay.
Right, so, he was really interested in what critics were saying.
Yeah.
He respected their insights.
Right.
But he also thought that their pronouncements needed a more solid philosophical basis.
Yeah, like a more rigorous...
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are the principles behind your judgments?
Right.
What are you basing this on?
So almost like a philosopher looking at the work of the critic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and so what was the third one?
Well, I think, you can't ignore the developments within philosophy itself,
Right.
Especially during the mid-20th century.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a time when analytic philosophy was really on the rise.
Yeah.
You had these movements like logical positivism.
Yeah.
Which, basically saw aesthetic claims as meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Hard to swallow if you're into art.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong claim.
Yeah.
And then you also had, like, the ordinary language philosophy.
Yeah. Which tended to be a bit suspicious of, those big systematic theories.
Yeah, so Beardsley was kind of working in this really interesting
Absolutely.
time of change.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't really fit neatly
into any one camp. Right?
into any one camp. No, he was kind of charting his own course.
Yeah, I mean, and you see that, like, even with how he approached the new art form.
For sure, yeah. The source calls his position open-minded moderation.
Yeah.
which I really like. He wasn't just automatically embracing every new trend.
Yeah.
But he was willing to engage with them.
Right.
And try to get something out of them.
See if there was something there.
Yeah, exactly. If something didn't resonate with him, he didn't just dismiss it.
Right.
He thought, okay, maybe there's something here I'm not getting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to look closer.
I think that's such a refreshing and valuable attitude.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and that kind of leads us to like how he was situated within the art criticism world at the time. And I know he had a strong...
Yeah, he had a real affinity for the new criticism.
Right. Which was a big movement at the time.
Huge movement, yeah. I mean, the whole emphasis on focusing just on the artwork itself.
On the work itself, right?
Yeah. The poem itself.
Yeah, and there's that famous quote from Alan Tate.
Oh, you must return to, we must never leave. The poem itself.
Yeah.
Right. And Beardsley very much echoed that.
Yeah.
He really stressed the importance of sticking to the text.
To the text, yeah. Like the critic's job is to unpack the textual meaning.
Right.
And that means, not getting bogged down in external factors.
Right, like the artist's intention.
Yeah, like the artist's intentions or
the audience's response.
Yeah, the audience's emotional response or even like the social and political context.
Right, all of that stuff that was kind of fashionable at the time.
To bring in,
So, I mean, it seems like for Beardsley, it was all about...
It was about that close reading,
Right, close reading and like really engaging with the...
Just engaging with those intrinsic qualities, the intrinsic qualities.
Of the artwork.
So that's interesting, right? So it's almost like the philosophy of art for him is like this...
It's metacriticism, the source uses that term.
So it's almost like stepping back and looking at criticism itself.
Yeah, so, just as art criticism... examines particular works of art aesthetics as metacriticism.
Yeah.
Steps back and examines
the nature
and the basis
of criticism
of the statements that critics make.
Okay, I like that. So it's criticism of criticism.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
And he actually identifies, right? Like
he does. He identifies three main types of critical statements.
Yeah, what are those?
So you have descriptive statements, interpretative statements, and evaluative statements.
Okay. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, sure. So a descriptive statement might be something like, the painting contains a small red patch in the upper right-hand corner.
Okay, so just like a simple...
Yeah, just like a straight-up observation.
Fact.
Okay. Or, in music, you might say something like, Haydn's 23rd Symphony features a recurring motif in the first movement.
Right, just like...
Yeah, so just kind of reporting on what's there.
Exactly.
Okay, and then what about interpretative?
So interpretative statements
go
beyond...
Go a bit deeper.
Just description and start to talk about, meaning and significance. So, you might say something like, that portrait is intended to depict Notary Sojak.
Right.
Or the central theme of Macbeth explores the corrupting influence of ambition.
Okay, so it's bringing in like meaning.
Yeah, like the interpretation, symbolism.
And then evaluative.
Yeah, so evaluative statements are those judgments about
the quality of the artwork.
Okay.
So, you might say Mozart's Clarinet Quintet is an exceptionally beautiful piece.
Okay, so it's like a value judgment.
Yeah, a value judgment. Or this novel suffers from a poorly developed plot and unconvincing characters.
Right. So those are your classic good or bad judgments.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really useful, that breakdown.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, so let's move on now to a slightly more abstract topic, which is the ontology of art.
Okay, the ontology of art.
And this is...
Yeah, this is where things get a little heady.
Gets a little tricky, right?
Because we're talking about like the nature of artistic existence.
Yeah, like what does it even mean?
Yeah, what does it even mean?
For art to exist.
Right. Like what is a work of art? Fundamentally.
So what was Beardsley's take on this?
Well, it actually changed quite a bit.
Yeah, over time.
So, like, where did he begin?
So, early on, he was kind of hesitant to give a strict definition
of work of art.
Okay. He focused more on this idea of aesthetic objects.
Okay.
And he saw those as a kind of perceptual...
Okay, so, like, how does that work?
So, he distinguished between physical objects and perceptual objects.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, so think of a painting, right?
Yeah.
The physical object is the canvas, the pigments,
the frame, right?
Frame, all that stuff. The aesthetic object is the image, the composition, the visual experience that it offers.
So the thing that we're actually looking at.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So early on, he kind of leaned towards this phenomenalistic view.
Okay.
Which basically meant that aesthetic objects are just like collections of sense data.
Okay, so like...
Yeah. My experience of the painting...
Yeah, your personal experience...
is the aesthetic object.
Exactly.
Okay, so what's wrong with that?
What? I mean, it creates some problems for critical judgment.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because like, my experience of a painting might change.
Yeah.
Depending on the lighting.
Yeah, or my mood.
Yeah, or my mood.
Yeah.
But we still want to be able to talk about the artwork.
As something stable.
As a stable thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Something that's kind of consistent.
So what did he do to fix that?
Well, he introduced these further distinctions. Right. So, you know, he talked about the artifact of production, the performance, and the presentation.
Okay, so like what are those?
Okay, so think of a play.
All right.
Right.
Yeah.
The artifact is the script.
Okay.
The production is a specific staging of that play.
Okay.
The performance is like last Tuesday night's show.
Okay. Right, one particular instance.
Yeah.
And the presentation is my experience of that.
Exactly.
Okay, so where does the aesthetic object fit into that?
Well, initially he thought it was the production.
Okay, the production. So like the staging.
Yeah, the staging is the way it's all put together.
Okay, so what's wrong with that?
Well, the problem is that these productions can have really different ontological status.
Okay, so like different ways of existing.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, you know, a novel that's read silently in your head, that's a mental event.
Right.
A musical performance.
Yeah.
That's a public temporal event.
Okay.
A sculpture is a physical object.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're all very different kinds of things.
So did he just give up there?
No. He kept thinking about it.
Okay.
And eventually he shifted towards this idea of non-reductive materialism, which sounds fancy.
Yeah.
But it basically means that artworks are physical objects with some special
properties. Okay.
So, you know, like the Mona Lisa, it's a physical object, but it also has these aesthetic properties that make it, you know, the Mona Lisa.
Yeah. So how does that work for multiple artworks?
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
Like musical performance.
Right, like a musical composition exists across tons of performances.
Right, so which one is the artwork?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So he kind of explored this idea of ontological pluralism.
Okay.
Which basically means that there are different kinds of artwork. Okay. So, you know, singular artworks like paintings and sculptures.
Yeah.
Those are just individual physical objects.
Okay.
But multiple artworks like musical compositions.
Yeah.
Those are
types of objects or kinds of physical objects.
Yeah.
So like all the performances of Beethoven's Fifth.
Right.
They all kind of fall under this.
Under this type.
Yeah, this type of Beethoven's Fifth.
Okay. But did he feel good about that?
Not really, no. I mean, he found it kind of unsatisfying and, you know, philosophers, they like things to be neat and tidy.
Right.
And this was kind of messy.
Okay, so did he try to clean it up at all?
Well, he considered a couple of other options.
Okay.
You know, one was to try and subsume physical objects under types.
Okay.
So, you know, like the Mona Lisa isn't a unique object.
Yeah.
It's just an instance of
a
type of painting.
Right.
But that runs into problems too.
Okay, like what?
Well, I mean, if the Mona Lisa is just a type, then it doesn't have the specific
quality,
perceptual qualities.
Yeah, that make it, you know,
unique.
And plus, like, the idea of multiple original Mona Lisas.
Yeah, that doesn't
sit well.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other option was to try and go the other way.
Okay.
And say, okay, all artworks are physical objects.
Okay.
But then you deal with the multiple artworks.
Right, because like if a musical score is performed in two places simultaneously, which one is the artwork?
Yeah, exactly.
So it seems like he didn't really resolve this.
No, not fully.
Okay, so just left it as this.
He kind of ended up accepting this messy pluralism.
Okay, so I mean, it's interesting. He was grappling with this really fundamental question of what art even is.
Yeah, and how it exists in the world.
So let's move on now to the question of like, how we define art.
Now, I know that he initially avoided a formal definition, but did he ever give us one?
He did, eventually.
Okay.
But it was a long road to get there.
Okay, so what was the journey like?
Well, early on, he was working with this concept of the aesthetic object.
Right.
And he kind of proposed this schematic definition based on different sensory fields.
Okay.
So, like visual objects that are distinct from utilitarian items.
Okay.
Auditory objects that are distinct from mere noise. And so on.
And so on. And so he was going to have a different definition.
Yeah, for each field.
For each art form.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so did he stick with that?
He didn't, no.
Okay, what changed his mind?
Well, I think he realized that his objections...
To, the other definition?
Yeah, to, intentional definitions.
Right.
Those definitions that focus on the artist's intentions.
Yeah.
He realized those objections weren't
as strong as he thought.
As definitive as he thought.
Okay.
He started to see that maybe intentions did have some role.
Okay, so he was warming up to the intentionalist camp.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
But before coming up with his own definition, he really engaged with George Dickey's institutional definition of art.
Okay, remind me what that is.
So Dickey argued that a work of art is basically an artifact that's been given the status of candidate for appreciation. By someone acting on behalf of the art world.
The art world, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did Beardsley think about that?
Oh, he had a lot of problems.
What? Well, first of all, he's what kind of appreciation are you talking about?
Yeah, is it just...
Any kind of appreciation.
Any kind of appreciation.
Or is it, a special kind?
Yeah, or is it specifically aesthetic appreciation?
Yeah.
And if it is... then Dickey needs to explain what that is.
Right.
Because he was kind of skeptical about aesthetic appreciation.
As a separate category.
As a real category.
Right, okay.
He also thought the whole idea of candidacy for appreciation was really vague.
Yeah, I mean, what does that even mean?
Exactly, right. What does it mean?
Does it have to be nominated?
Yeah, right.
By somebody?
That doesn't need to be nominated by someone.
Yeah, or is it just, out there and we just decide?
Yeah, how does something become a candidate?
Yeah.
Okay. And then he questioned who gets to confer this status.
Right, who's the...
Yeah, who's the authority?
The decider.
Yeah, the decider.
Right, and Dickey said it was the art world.
Yeah, the art world.
But then, how do we even...
Yeah, what is the art world?
Put to define that?
Right, exactly. And Beardsley argued that unlike, a real institution.
Yeah, like a university.
Yeah, like a university with bylaws and stuff. The art world doesn't have that kind of formal structure.
Right.
He famously asked, does it even make sense to speak of acting on behalf
of a practice? Yeah.
Of a practice.
Right. A practice isn't an entity.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was his final objection?
Well, he saw a potential circularity in Dickey's definition.
Okay, how so?
So, art is defined in terms of the art world.
Right.
The art world is comprised of people who have a particular relationship with art.
Right.
So it's
So it's defining art in terms of itself.
Exactly. And while Dickey kind of argued that this was, a fertile circularity, Beardsley wasn't buying it.
Okay, so having gone through all that, right, and shot down Dickey's definition, what did he land on?
Well, he ended up proposing his own